Hi, I'm Gauldeen. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Gauldeen.
I was sitting here identifying so much with Pat, and even though I'm the alcoholic, Bob sometimes says that he really thinks I'm an Al-Anon with a severe drinking problem. Because that's, I have most of the personality traits that I hear Al-Anons talk about, and so I've been very close to a lot of Al-Anons, but it doesn't make me any less of an alcoholic. Bob and I got married over 51 years ago, and we were a couple of kids. It was during the war, and I'd always had the idea growing up that all I was going to ever want out of life was to get married and have a family and a white picket fence, you know, and all of the things that go along with that. And if I could have that, I would be happy. In other words, he was going to make me happy. And so when we started out this marriage, it was okay for a while, although, you know, things were not normal in those years. He was overseas, and, you know, we didn't have a normal marriage at that point. But when the war was over and we settled down to start to raise this family, and I became the housewife, and he was supposed to be my protector and, you know, the person that was going to keep me happy. That is putting a big burden on another person to expect him to keep me happy. And I didn't realize that at the time. And something was going wrong. I mean, he wasn't making me happy like I thought he should. I mean, he was doing other things, and they weren't necessarily making me happy. I turned to alcohol because I found that alcohol made me happy. And for many, many years, like Pat said, they had a lot of fun with it. We did too, to a certain point, until I crossed over that line, and my alcoholism or my drinking became his problem, not mine. It didn't bother me a bit, but it seemed to bother him a lot. And I was not a person that went out to bars or anything like that. I mean, my drinking was at home, and it caused lots of arguments and fights. And I always thought, you know, if he'd get off my back, I'm not hurting anybody. I don't know why he's making such a big fuss over the way I drink. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do, and I felt that I had to do that. You know, my house is probably the cleanest house in Long Beach in those days, and I would paint, you know, and I was always busy, and alcohol seemed to give me energy, you know, and I could go on and on. I identified last night with the speaker when he was talking about his mom who was on diet pills. Alcohol affected me the same way, you know, busy, cleaning and cooking, and I was a gourmet cook, and everything was cooked with wine, and you know, and I was so busy doing all of these things, and I couldn't figure out, why is he always on my back over my drinking? I'm doing these things for him. Well, as time went on, the alcohol really got out of hand, and I thought this went on, my drinking went on for a period of 22 years. And at the end, I thought that I had really become so important in his life. I mean, because of being this perfect housewife. And that's what I was. I was not a companion. I was not a wife. I was a housewife. I did things for the house. And I raised my kids the same way. You know, get out of my way. You're bothering me while I'm baking these brownies for your brownie meetings, you know. I mean, don't get in my way. I'm busy doing things for you. And this was what I thought that a wife was supposed to do. And I was very busy doing all of these things. And then he had even let me become his secretary. Now, that I just knew that he could never, ever do without me in his life. I mean, I was really ingrained in there, you know. So when he fired me from my job, and I really knew that the next step was firing me from my housewifely duties, I got sober. Now, I had been going to Alcoholics Anonymous off and on for about 2.5 years before that, and things were in this marriage was, I can only describe it as the marriage was over. At that point, we were living under the same roof, and that's about all there was. Fighting, he was always on my case about my drinking, and my self-worth was pretty doggone low. You know, when it came time to make my amends, saying I'm sorry was just plain crazy, because every sentence that I started in those days was, I'm sorry, but I was sorry for living, you know. I was just sorry, and I think that I felt like I had to be doing all these things just to be worthy of being in that house. And but anyhow, I got sober, and I wish I could say that immediately the marriage just went back together, you know, and we got very, very happy, and that didn't happen. And I shared yesterday that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with a terrible resentment against him, because he fired me from that job and turned right around and hired a buxom blonde to replace me in my job. And she was in my home because we had our office there, and it was a bad scene. I mean, I was really miserable, and I was going to these meetings and complaining about all these terrible things that he was doing, because he just didn't treat me nice because I quit drinking. But I hadn't changed anything, you know. All I was doing was not drinking, and I was just miserable. And this went on for quite some time. And it was not until I was finally able to take my 4th and my 5th step that I believe that any progress was made in this relationship of ours. And it was during this 5th step that my sponsor, I took it with my sponsor, that she pointed out to me, you see, I always thought that all of these things that I was doing were nice things. I mean, you know, I was not a bad person. I was a nice person. I did things for people. But it always had a strings attached to it, you know. It was never for fun and for free. It was always, what can I get back? Will it make them like me? You know, and there was always a motivation behind anything I ever did. And we started out our marriage that way, and it lasted that way for over 20 years. The motivation of what can I get back? Anyhow, my sponsor pointed this out to me, that I was just terribly self-centered. I didn't know how to love, because mine was expectations. It was not love at all. And I realized that, you know, I didn't know how to love. I never had. I didn't know what love was. And Alcoholics Anonymous showed me what love was. They didn't tell me. What they did was they just loved me, you know. Those women in that meeting and my sponsor and people, they showed me what unconditional love was by giving it to me. And I think that the example that we see in Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon is much more important than the words that we hear. I mean, the feelings that we get, you know, from the people that are giving this unconditional love. But anyhow, that is how things, I mean, that is, at that point is when things started turning around in our marriage. And, you know, I don't think that we ever have sat down and said, you know, what can we do to get this thing built back together or anything like that. What seemed to happen, and that's why it's hard to describe, for me to describe how did your relationship go back together, because there was not a particular point that we did anything. It just seemed like I just, at that point, started putting the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life and doing the best I could with the steps, and working the 6th and the 7th step, and after the 5th step, you know, and going on and working those steps. And obviously, Bob was doing the same thing in Al-Anon. One thing I had done is I took my eyes off of him, and I quit expecting him to make me happy, and you know, trying to change him. If he would do this, I would be happy. If he would do that, and thinking I knew what was best for him, I was able to finally take my eyes off of him, and my sponsor said, you start working your program and keep your eyes on what you've got a lot to do, so you work on yourself and don't worry about what other people are doing. And I think I was able to do that because somehow this marriage just started going down the railroad tracks, as they say, side by side. And in my opinion, I wouldn't have it any other way. Howard talked a lot about commitment, And both Bob and I are very committed to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. And he talked about, not saying no to an AA request or an Al-Anon request, and I think we do that. I don't know that, I think what I have finally come to realize is that if I stand in the way of Bob doing what he has to do, then I'm trying to be his God. In other words, I think God has things for all of us to do, and we have to be open in life to do those things. And in order to do that, we have to be open enough to say yes, when we're asked to do something. And I'm so grateful that I figured that out, because if my life would be very, very dreary today had my sponsor let me say, no, I won't do this, yes, I'll do this, and I'd have been picking out, the things that I was going to do in program or in my life, because I would have really shortchanged myself. You see, God has had ideas about what should go on in my life, and Bob has given me the freedom to do that. He's allowed me to do my growth in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I hope that that's the way that I have been with him, to allow him to do the things he has to do. And in so doing, it's turned out to be a real good relationship that we've had. We had and it hasn't all been real, happy, good times. Our son got very sick about 5 years ago, and he had a terminal illness. He had AIDS, and we had to bring him home. We didn't have to. We did bring him home during his last days of his life. Somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous said to me, one of the hardest things for people to do is to stay married. Said that, but, it didn't seem like a good idea to tell me that at that point, but they did. But I found that what that did was it brought Bob and I closer together. I remember when we first brought him home, and I'm not one who rants and raves a lot. I don't lash out at Bob very often. But in my frustration of wanting to do something for this sick son, and then there was nothing I could do, I lashed out at him because he was there. And he didn't lash back, but it was the one thing that I realized that, you always lash out at the person you love when you're frustrated, and you have to do that. It's that person that you love that you lash out at. And it was probably the only time, because after that, we started in as a team, doing the things that had to be done. And I really believe that our relationship got closer because of what we had to go through with this, because he became very supportive of what I had to do, and I did the same with him. And the one thing that I am grateful for through that so-called experience that probably I wouldn't ask to do it again, was it gave me the opportunity to show unconditional love. That's something that we talk about so much in program, and that's hard to do, to give unconditional love. But I learned how to do that, and it felt good, to be able to give to our sick son unconditional love with no expectations, because, there wasn't anything he could do, but I could do for him. And it was a marvelous feeling, to learn how to give unconditional love. So, you look at the good that comes out of some of the seemingly bad, and that's what I feel about that experience. But we've had some marvelous experiences in this marriage, and I don't know, the way I feel today, like I said, we just celebrated our 51st anniversary in April, and I would imagine that if we keep working our programs, we'll probably still be married tomorrow. And we do it one day at a time, and that's what I expect, that we probably will be married tomorrow, and we'll go back to home and keep on doing what we're doing, and things will be just fine. Thanks a lot.